Welcome, everybody. We are here for the next episode of the podcast. Today, I have an amazing speaker, Mario Guerendo. Mario, that's a phenomenal background that you have. And it would be great to hear from you about yourself and how you got into this 20-year long journey in global operations and what made you write a book.
Sure. Manju, thanks for having me on your podcast, and very excited to have this conversation with you. Love what you and your team are doing in supply chain and AI space. So honored to be here. And about me, Manju, I've spent the better part of 20 years leading transformation inside global operation across all of that. I kept running into the same wall. The technology always worked, most of the time. 90% of the time, technology works. What keeps failing is the organization ability to actually change how it operates. And I've seen this across geographies and across industries, right? And market segment for that matter. That's true for the mid-market segment and the large enterprise segment. The impact is the percentage of the impact is different from one segment to the other. A lot stronger on the large enterprise, but it's always the same. It's the same problem. So when I was global CIO at a Fortune 150 manufacturer, Cummins Inc., running a technology across 100 plus manufacturing plants, over 50 plus countries. Um, Before that, I was CEO for a global logistic company. Before that, I was a CIO for a medtech company, and before that, I was a founder. I started a tech company specializing in supply chain technology before selling it to a PE group. And so when agentic AI started showing up, I realized that the stakes were much higher, and because these systems, when you think about it, those systems make decisions and take actions on their own, and that's fundamentally um, a very different challenge than anything we've dealt with in the past. There was a Deloitte study, I think it was published earlier this year, and basically they put it as at 93% of AI investments are going towards technology, and only 7% are going towards redesigning how work gets done. And there was another study by MIT. This was sometimes in Q3, Q4 last year, and MIT found that 95% of Gen AI projects failed to deliver meaningful business value. So when you put those numbers together, that tells you everything, right? And basically, you see that the real issue is the operating model, and that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, just for audience purposes, what's your book called and why did you call the book with that name?
Yeah. So the book is called The Agentic Operator: Leading the Enterprise when AI Run the Operation. And the reason I named it that way was because I wrote a book that was published last year, and it was the Transformation Operator, right? And it's basically the executives who is basically doing all the hard work, the person who um, leads what everybody else is avoiding in the enterprise: the difficult work and the accountability for the large scale um, high stake transformation initiative. And then when we're going to the agentic era, we're realizing that this person changes, right? So now that you have the agent running essentially the operation, well, what is the operator, the transformation operator? What does that person become? And I call that person the agentic operator because it's you really now you're leading the enterprise when AI runs the operation. So that was the reason for the title. So the agentic operator.
Great, an intriguing title indeed. When we think about the agentic world, companies are evolving, Mario, as you know. They are looking at their organizational structures, hierarchies, the people. How do they fit agents to work with people, be it the task, the security, the access, the privileges? There are many layers to the complexity. And what's intriguing in what you said, Mario, is the two studies that you took. The common theme is really taking, in this case, an agentic technology to put it to real use,
Mhm.
and real use by end users on a daily and a consistent basis
Yeah,
has a very different dynamic, and unfortunately history repeats itself. Change management keeps coming back again and again,
yeah,
right? And in one of the things that I understood about what you mentioned in your book is this two engine model.
yeah.
And what is that? And why does it matter for manufacturers, especially the ones who are looking at humanoids, agents, AI, digital twin? There's a whole bunch of things that they are trying to comprehend and enable.
Very good. So the two engine operating model. So the way I think about this is most enterprise today are running on a single engine, and I call it the innovation engine. Really, that's where you deploy the agents, you build pilots, you invest in the infrastructure, and then honestly, that engine is getting a lot of attention. It's getting a lot of funding right now. But what's missing is the second engine. And I call the second engine the value realization engine. That's where you actually redesign the roles, the governance, the decision rights, the incentive structures, so that the enterprise can capture the value from the technology um, that it's investing in. So the innovation engine builds the capability, and the value realization engine converts that capability into business outcome. And without the second engine, what you're essentially doing is you're generating capability that the organization cannot absorb. And by the way, that's why pilots succeed, but they scale when you try to, they fail when you try to scale those pilots. So the pilot worked because the operated the operating and the let me get back. The
Yeah, yeah, we can
pilot,
do a cut and go back.
okay.
Cut.
The
So, you can restart.
yeah. Um, so I want to go back to why the pilot failed, right? So the pilot, they succeed in a confined environment, but when you try to scale them outside the test environment, they fail. And the pilot worked in that confined environment because they operated uh, um, outside the existing um, enterprise operating model. Essentially, they were not faced with the reality of the operating environment. So when you take the agents out, scaling failed, and and it failed because you pushed the new capability into the old enterprise structure. So now for manufacturers specifically, this is very critical because the coordination cost is huge, right? You're operating across plants, suppliers, distribution networks in multiple geographies. The agents can see across all of that, but then the organization is still structured in functional siloed with really misaligned incentives. The agent cross enterprise insight and never actually converts um, to cross enterprise action because of the old structure and the functional silos that exist. And that's essentially why they
Yeah,
they
with all the experience that you have, Mario, you have seen this happen over and over in decades because technology is coming in. And what was I like the way you phrased it as a two-engine model. On one side, there's the technology launch, and the other side is the value realization. One of the things that we at Pluto 7, working for 10 years with Google, uh, have realized and continuously keep evolving so that the value realization, the technology innovation and value realization gets closer. Although there is an unrealistic expectation
yeah,
of innovate and prove the value before you even get started. That's one dimension. The second, innovate, but I need to start seeing value right away. It's almost like the vendors and the technology providers has a burden on the internal change management. Third, if they want to change, there's a small subset of people who are ready for change, but the superset is not ready for the change for the reasons that you mentioned. Process need to change, people needs to change. There is many manufacturing plants. One plant doesn't follow what the other plant does, or they vary by 30-40%, which means what works here doesn't necessarily work exactly the same way elsewhere. And
right.
then there is a regional ownership. Then there's pyramids, which have a conflicting goals in terms of adopting the exact same technology, even though it makes logical sense. So we are seeing all these variations. So in my words, what I say, what in when we deal with customers, like technology is the easy part. That's 30% of the work. 70% is everything else but technology. Those numbers might change depending on the technology or what problem you're trying to solve, but that's our view.
And I completely agree.
Yeah.
Like,
Moving on, Mario, you mentioned that making data agent friendly isn't enough. What else need to change?
so there's a lot of conversation about that, about the focus is on data and making the data agent friendly. So one, um, by the way, you're completely right. I agree with you that that the data friendliness should be foundational. That's I think that's the baseline. But you've talked about how 80% of the agent failure traced back to poorly organized and siloed data. And in my view, that's the reality, because I've seen a lot of that throughout my career and talking to industry peers. But the way I see it is data readiness is really necessary, but it's not enough. right? You also need agent-friendly governance. And what I mean by this is who is actually accountable when an agent makes a bad decision. You need agent-friendly incentive structures, because if the planner, the supply chain planner is still measured on forecast accuracy, but the agent is generating the forecast, that planner is going to override the agent or game the matrix every time, right? Because of the incentives. Then you need agent friendly decision rights. Which decisions can agent make on their own? Which ones require human approval? And what exactly is that escalation boundary? Because that's super important. So the way I frame it in the book is three layers. The data layers makes agent capable. The governance layer makes agent trustworthy, and the operating model layer makes agent valuable. And here's where I think it connects to what you're doing at Pluto 7. When your customer deploy your agent solution on a well-organized data, and then you see the results in 60 seconds, like you mentioned during the Google presentation, that's really powerful. But then the question that ultimately determines whether the deployment scales or whether the organization around it is designed to act on those um, agent produce. And that's critical. That's the super critical part.
So, Mario, with all the experience that you have, not only running these big enterprises, you bought legacy software, SaaS, if you don't mind me saying it, and you're seeing this industry evolve. Um, and it's by every measure, at least from what I see, is truly disruptive of a scale not seen in the at least last 30, 40 years.
Mhm.
And as we think about this, Mario, the legacy softwares and the SaaS companies, they need to bring all those three layers. And to be able to do this at a scale when they have a running install base is a challenge by itself. So when we at Pluto 7 work with customers, especially with agentic commerce coming in, and when we say that, hey, you're not only, Mario, the three things that you mentioned, right, around the operator layer, the governance layer, and the capability layer, they need to work harmoniously because now agents are shopping. Agents need to fulfill your inventory, your demand, your ads, and make sure you're profitable. And you have to let them make decisions, otherwise you lose the business. 20-30% of companies' revenues are under risk, just like the pre-e-commerce era that we landed to the post-e-commerce era for 25 years. Now it's
Yeah.
agentic commerce. And the reality is not every company is going to make it and capitalize and scale AI and agentic AI with the operator model, like you mentioned, with all the discipline in the right way.
Mhm.
So as we think about this, um, your experience in not just buying those softwares and implementing it and knowing that what you highlighted is, it's one thing to implement a technology, but make it work in the real world, in your manufacturing floors. And the other thing is, these new technologies requires a very fundamental rethink of even hierarchies. I'll just quote one example before we move on to the next question.
Mhm.
Is I was working for one of the world's largest beer manufacturers, breweries. And when we had to build a sentient organization capability, but the organization is smart, continuously learning itself, we had to build a decision matrix of all, because if you think about all the leaders hierarchies, whether it's supply chain, manufacturing, and so on. So those leaders exist primarily to make good decisions, fast decisions, connected decisions.
Yeah.
Now your agentic operator is the Jarvis, who's going to help you make those maybe 5x, 10x faster. In your mind, you're seeing enterprises come up with chief AI officer, chief digital officers, and many of these titles. Are those roles and titles and those sub teams good enough? If it is, why? And if it's not, why not?
Yeah. So yes. So you see a lot of those titles popping up, and y- are they important for the enterprise? Yes, they are. So so to be clear, we're not saying that those roles don't matter, but I think the challenge is that those roles are typically um, anchored in what I described earlier as engine one, which is the innovation engine, right? They focus on deploying the technology, building the platform, running the pilots, and that work is essential, right? The work is essential, but there's another half of the problem that nobody owns, right? And it's that value realization piece that we talked about earlier. So the other half is the operating model. Who designs the roles? Um, who realigns the incentives? Who restructures the governance so that the enterprise can actually capture value from the technology, from what the technology makes possible? And that kind of work lives with the operator, someone who understands both the technology and the organization deeply enough to redesign how the two work together. So in the book, I describe that person as the agentic operator. When you think about it, the traditional operator made the enterprise work through personal coordination and execution, and basically absorbing the complexity themselves, right? But the agentic operator is fundamentally different. It basically shifts it completely towards architecture, governance, and value realization. And what's interesting is that Accenture recently published a research proposing something called I think it was the Chief Agentic Resources Officer, right? And essentially, it's a C-suite role that governs agent. And I think that's the technology side of the coin. But the other side is this: it is standing um, uh, a VRO, right? It's standing a VRO and not at the value realization office. And basically, it's an office that governs outcomes. Customers are buying outcomes today. So you need both that chief AI resources officer and the value realization office. One that's going to one governs the agent, and the other one is going to govern value. And right now, most enterprises have neither. So
Yeah.
that's the gap.
Mario, I'm always intrigued by how with every wave there is new titles that emerge. You do need structures, you need roles,
Yeah.
and of course, whether it's research firms or GSIs, they all come with these terms because they need to sell their services. But at the end of the day, you still need to solve the problems, right? Like you said, you need both. You can't just keep selling concepts. You need to solve the real problem. and take it to production to avoid those traps. Um, and the traps of the things that you mentioned in the MIT report and Deloitte report,
Mhm.
and so on. So while that is happening, and just a little bit of sidetrack here, Mario. I was in conversation last week with Ben Kenyon, the 76ers NBA coach,
Mhm.
and, and I was drawing parallels with sports and what we do with data and AI. It's decisions, right? And I was talking to him and about how the correlation between the physical action and the mental decision, whether to shoot or not to shoot, is on the basketball court is a decision, and that's a highly coordinated set of decision. If our world were to work with such perfect coordination in manufacturing, we would have almost zero inefficiencies, if not, right?
Yep.
And your son plays for 49ers. So as you think about all your life experience, there's a story in the book that you mentioned about a factory leader
Yep.
who made that AI made a decision that AI would never have approved. Tell me about that. And it'll be interesting if you bring some 49ers or sports analogy into the mix as well. Again, would like to hear your perspective.
Yes, absolutely. So that's it was when I was writing the book, I sat down with guy named Jean-Luc Tété, French guy. He was the former CEO of um, Perret Faurecia Automotive, and they basically made they make dashboards and anything that goes inside the vehicle, your seats, your seat belt, the console, all of that. And that's one of my favorite part of the book because um, interestingly enough, he was one of the first, to implement an automation, intelligent automation with some AI features in some of his factories, but years ago, way before COVID, probably 10 years ago. So at the time, he ran um, an industrial division. I think he had over 12,000 employees across, global manufacturing operation. And he told me just several stories. He talked about um, the, um, the boundaries between um, artificial intelligence and the human spirit. Right, that was really the foundation of the 2 hour conversation we had, and he told me that about taking over um, a failing factory that the corporate group, at the time wanted to completely shut down. And it had just gone, the factory, it had just gone to 14-day strike. Everybody basically wrote them off in the corporate group. They wrote them off. They're like, hey, we really can't do anything with this. And so what did he do? He changed zero personnel, zero, not one person. He walked in, listened, and then he reframed the entire purpose of um, of the factory. And this was in Morocco, by the way. So he told the entire factory. He brought everybody, like the leadership all the way to the line workers. He basically did a town hall, gathered everyone, and and he told them. He said, when you come to work every day, you're not coming um, to just do a job. You're building Morocco. That's
Hmm.
an important thing that you're doing. You're building Morocco. And he said, and then he also told them, looking at the head count of the factory, you also have 400 families behind you that depend on what you do here. And that, you reframe, and all of a sudden, just light bulbs went on in uh, the team's head, and that same team, uh, they basically doubled the factory workforce within 2 years. He also told me about setting um, a sales target 5 times higher than the previous year, and he was able to do that because the the team didn't know it was supposed to be impossible, and they succeeded, right? So when you create that environment of unconstrained thinking, you get amazing innovation. So that was one of the stories. It was uh it was very interesting. um
Yeah. Mario, I think you and I, when we spoke in the Google Atlanta office, this is one of the things that you and I found it common. When you said you're launching the book, this was, I think, a month back or so, and you highlighted about how it's about organization, and then I was talking to you about the book that I'm writing, which is around people.
mhm,
AI is more about people than the technology itself, and it's strange that we spend a decade learning about AI
yeah,
and come back to the fundamental that it's about the organization structure, it's about the operator, it's about the people. And what the story that you just mentioned, Morocco, that's absolutely brilliant, because ultimately it still comes to that collective intelligence, the mission and the purpose that that factory got. And and as you're narrating the story, I was just thinking on the lines of when the book that I am writing, which we'll be announcing pretty soon, is about the collective learning we got after working with over a decade with Google and customers on POCs and pilots and production rollout. And to your earlier point, it has always been about adoption. Sometimes even if you have the absolute best results,
mhm,
people have to accept and use it.
yeah,
And there is, for good or bad, there's a lot of information out there about AI. And there's also a lot of myth about AI taking away every job, which I don't believe in.
yeah,
Right? It's an extreme view.
yeah,
However, the human thinking is going to continue to amplify, and we are going to do extraordinary things, that like the factory example, what you said, where the same amount of factory workers were able to produce more output when the mission and the purpose and there was clarity that that leader provided.
provide, yeah. And if I may add one quick thing, the whole point he was trying to convey in the story is that um AI makes rational this rational data driven decision, and the value of the human spirit is being able to make the irrational decisions, right? The things that every data every data point would advise against. So yeah, using that factory example, and I discussed this in more greater detail in the book, but this was an example of an irrational decision, because all the data points, all financial data, all performance metrics pointed to shutting down the factory, right? So if we were just following um, AI decisions, they would have shut down the factory. So back to that boundaries um, between AI and the human spirit. And he used the line, he said, AI will make you good, but AI with the human spirit will make you great. And to him, that's really the big takeaway for these AI transitions that we're going through right now, in the world.
That's that's great, Mario. Before we move to the last question,
Mhm.
one of the um, mission or the purpose or the elements of the mission and purpose that we went out to solve in the world is there is 20 to 30% planning error in spite of all the software services and people and talent and everything. And in 2016, when we saw the data volume continue to go up, number of decisions have to keep increasing.
Mhm.
People have limited time, planners have limited time. These are mathematically and statistically savvy people. They have limited time in the day, and you can't keep increasing headcount to do more math. My thinking at that time is if you have to make good rational decisions, which is 70% of the time your planning decisions are right, 30% or 20% of time it's wrong.
Mhm.
That was a lot of money with inventory positioning movement.
Right.
As you start automating these decisions, relying on AI and now agent and multi-agent architectures, the volume is going to increase, and it was not practical to think that somehow we are going to take the traditional way of doing things and still hit those thresholds. So especially with agentic commerce, now that game changes fast.
Mhm.
So with that as the background and with all the conversation we had, my last question is, what's the first thing a supply chain leader should do Monday morning after listening to this conversation, given where we are now?
Supply chain leader. If the After listening to this conversation, what is the first thing they should do? Um, so if I was talking to to your audience, and we're Sunday night, and you just listen to the podcast, and you're going to the office Monday morning, what would it be? And it would be this: audit your incentive structure, pull up the performance matrix for the role closest to your AI deployment, um, and ask yourself one question, and one super critical question, and that is, are these people being measured on the outcome that align with what the agents are optimized for? And I think that's the big question, because if the demand planning agent is optimizing for cross enterprise inventory efficiency, but your planners are still measured on regional forecast accuracy, well, you have a structural conflict, right? The agent will produce the answer, and then the organization will ignore it. Why? No, because that's not the incentive structure. So when you think about it, if the people aren't really the problem, right? They're not. We hear that they're resisting change and all that, and I don't see it that way. Um, they're not resisting change, but they're being rational inside a system that rewards the wrong behavior. And to me, that's the problem. And then the beauty of all of this is uh, the audit. Um, the I want to think. I want to say this clearly. When you start, if you want to audit the incentive structure, that audit will be really fast. This is not a hard thing to do, right? Uh, an hour. Within an hour, you can do this audit, and you'll see if uh, the incentive structures are aligned with what the agents are optimizing for. That's an easy thing to do. So it would tell you, um, it will tell you more about your AI investments, whether they will scale, um, whether they have the ability to scale um, faster than um, any technology assessment you could ever run. So the audit incentives is is your your gold mine here. And then of course, you know, get the book, and it's on Amazon, and then it covers in great detail everything we've talked about.
Yeah, looking forward to finishing that book, Mario, and with the words of wisdom that you shared, agentic workforce transformation, starting with the incentives, transform your workforce, but truly look at your incentives and how the KPIs and how they're aligned. What's a KPI your agent is driving versus a human is driving, and if you bring synergies, there's less friction. With that said, Mario, great, very insightful conversation and very timely, along with your book. And these are historic years, and upon applying it right, there's a lot of good that's going to come out of it. Thank you
Yeah.
for your time, and for the audience, thank you, and please take a look at the book and have a great day.